All right, folks, welcome back for another episode of Riftbound 101. This is episode 36, and this is the promised mailbag episode, just titled Mailbag March 2026. Super simple. This episode is going to be all about answering questions that you all submitted over the last two episodes and on the post for the channel. So I think we have like 21 questions to go through, some compound questions, some not. And unlike other episodes, this one's going to be slightly messy because I'm going to be tabbing a lot between some stuff. So it's there's a presentation as there usually is, but I'm going to be swapping to other screens to answer stuff when needed. So yeah, welcome, and hopefully the wider camera angle for today is a bit more useful. I'm sure it's going to block out some stuff, so apologies for that, but I figured since I'm answering you, it would be better for me to have like an actual big camera and not just like a tiny camera on the side. And hopefully I'm not going to like mess up the stuff that I actually want to talk about, but we'll see how it works out. The first thing I want to do, and obviously this is going to block out some of these words, which I can't see because I'm on one screen. I wanted to give you all another massive thank you for watching these videos, for giving the channel your time, which is not trivial, and for asking the questions that you asked. Today is all about you, and yeah, let's just get started. So, the questions are not in any particular order, aside from, I think, one or two that I left at the start and one or two that I left at the end, because I figured they work better there. Otherwise, I'm going through them kind of how I work through them in my document for myself. But yeah. So question number one, All Skaters on Deck asked, what drew you to Riftbound, and also what future content do you look forward to making? So what drew me to Riftbound is actually kind of funny and anecdotal. I've been playing Magic for a very long time, and I played a variety of other TCGs or CCGs over the years. I was in on Gwent for a while. I was playing LOR, Legends of Runeterra for a while, and I play a ton of board games for research and for work, including a variety of table card games like Arkham Horror, like Netrunner. So I've been in the card game space, I think, since I was about, I want to say like 7 years old. So it's been about 30 years, one way or another. And Riftbound was not really on my radar. When I was planning to hang out with my best friend, who is also somebody who works in academia and around games, shout out to Mark, he informed me that we were going to have a weekend where he bought Proving Grounds and he bought a couple boosters, and we're just going to play with out-of-the-box decks and start refining them. And so we made a day of it with two other people in our research lab. And I was like reasonably apprehensive. I hadn't heard much about the game. I was also a bit sad that LOR, kind of downsized its competitive system. And I was a bit skeptical of newer games. Mostly, I wasn't playing Fab due to pricing constraints for me, and I wasn't playing SWU either. Although it was something that was on my radar. So I was like, okay, let's play a different game. I went. I played the first day, and I played Lee Sin first. Not Lee Sin. Yi, Garen, and then I played some Lee Sin and some Victor because we had starter decks. And I got back on the subway to my place, and I got onto my local LGS's page, and I ordered a box of Proving Grounds, which was like $70 Canadian at the time. And then I started just like playing around at home with my partner. I had a couple boosters as well, and I was just like in love with the game. And what really drew me to it was the battlefield mechanics. One of the games that I've loved the most in recent years was Gwent, and I was incredibly sad when it went away because I liked kind of the row feel of that game, and the fact that you had positioning constraints and you had like different kinds of play where you were trying to like outpoint your opponent. So I like the fact that it had locations. I like the fact that it basically had like lane gameplay, and also that it was a scoring game as opposed to a life point total game, which I think is still, these are still like two of the things that draw me the most to Riftbound, and that have really caused me to not play so much Magic since October. So I feel like that was the start, and then kicking off with what I think is really a strong commitment to competitive play really got me in. So the fact that, flawed as cardio is, we had Nexus nights, we had skirmishes, there were like regionals happening, and that there was already like competitive content to look at from China, even though I came in late compared to some other folks who were really in on the ground floor. I felt like there was just so much to do and so much to look at that it was incredibly stimulating. And in terms of what kind of content I'm looking forward to making, two of the things that have eluded me thus far, mostly because of setup and also because of my own degree of expertise with editing technology, is doing like gameplay VODs, so like camera over matches. This I Part of it is I need to get stores that I go to start actually like broadcasting some gameplay, and I also need to spend time on TCGA. So I haven't really practiced all that much with TCGA, and the controls are a bit finicky. So I really want to start doing that so that I can probably play some more competitive events while I'm at home. Montreal is great, has a super vibrant community, but I would like some more high stakes events to participate in, especially ones where I can play decks that I might not have physically and shortcut some of that barrier to the cost of entry. That would be fantastic. The other thing that I look forward to making is collaborations with other creators, and I've reached out to some folks. So, fingers crossed that's coming up soon. But I think the more that people in the community collaborate together, the more it raises everybody's profile. We all get to talk to each other. We all care about different things. I'm more, I suppose, a cultural studies guy and an educator, and I'm interested, especially in the competitive scene, as a cultural space. But there are a lot of people who have different tool sets to me that I would love to talk to more regularly. So, yeah, these are some answers. The answer is I'm looking to make many different kinds of content, and I think the only thing I'm personally not really interested in is like pack opening, and I've had a lot of research on gambling and loot boxes, which make me have certain feelings about pack opening as a type of content. You enjoy what you enjoy, but it's just not something that I'll be making for people. Okay, next question. So, Lone Elite 1 asks, any tips for somebody who's played a lot of Magic on how to rewire their brain to better understand card value and optimal plays? I feel like I've been playing poorly for a while because I consistently misjudge cards and plays that are good. So this is something that I had to go through as well, and I think a lot of people I know are consistently thinking about this. One of the things that I can tell you helped me really rethink through this is thinking through the pace of how points are earned per turn. Magic doesn't really have any constraints on how much damage or how much value you can accrue on a single turn. Riftbound is a bit more complicated on that axis because you can only score 2 a turn, and in some cases you can compact sort of the pace of how you earn points. So, for example, if you're playing like Ride the Wind during an opponent's turn, or if you're playing cards that earn extra points like Draven Audacious. So you have to understand how fast you can play the game, and in that, I would also recommend that you understand what it is based on episode I did, I think like 2 weeks back, the speed episode. What it is that your deck's trying to do, right? Because optimal plays look quite different depending on the pace of play. For set 1, I think it was really suboptimal to miss a 2-drop on turn 1. That's still the case for decks like Draven, but there are a lot of decks that are playing for different conditions. If you look at like Aurelia decks or Detonate Draven or even Lucian, going second or playing fewer 2-drops is changes the way that you play the game quite heavily. And so cards will also change in terms of value within different decks and in different matchups. So my advice, my one big tip to rewire your brain is to really sit down with one deck for a while and to understand the pace of that deck and what it is that you're trying to do. And then to really look at the decks that you are playing against. So if you're going to your locals and you're playing a lot against Victor, a lot against Draven or Aurelia, understand what it is that they're trying to do. And I think once you have better assessment of what role each card fills, it starts to become a lot easier to understand their value and what is an optimal versus a suboptimal play. These are really complicated questions, so this is like a vague answer. But I would recommend going back to my speed and positions episode because I feel like that's the one that will probably help you out the most with this. And I would tell you to set aside a lot of foundational concepts in Magic for the moment, and then return to them once you have an understanding of how Riftbound differs as a game. The other tip would be devalue counter magic compared to what you value it like in Magic. In Magic, everything that's not a land is a spell, including creatures. This is not the case in Riftbound, so often cards that are units or gear are going to have very different overhead to counter magic as opposed to spells. And that's, relevant now, but it will also be relevant as Unleash comes out based on the number of counter magic cards that we're seeing floating around. So yeah, those would be like two to start with. The other one would be just look at a lot of content creators and what they're doing. And I think you're going to get a better sense of how to gauge cards based on what they're doing. And especially if you disagree, like try to understand why they're valuing cards more or less than you are. All right. Question number 3. How do you feel about TCGs being the gateway to one of the last few third spaces left in the US? So this is by radio.skeleton. I think it's a fantastic question. Comms research actually has a lot of work on third spaces and online third spaces, especially. For folks who don't know, a third space is often something that we would say is outside of the familial home or your living space and your workspace. So it's something that is neither the space that you're always in or that you live in, or the one that you need to for professional development to earn a living. So there are places that you go to. And over the years, because of cost of living and because of the move online, third spaces first shifted online. So you can think about like Reddit as a third space in a lot of ways. Chat rooms are third spaces. Forums are third spaces. A lot of like chats in games, like if you played World of Warcraft, those are third spaces. There's spaces where you meet other people, either on the basis of proximity or shared interests or some other kind of vector that's organizing them. And I do think that TCGs are a gateway to get people into card stores, especially when things like tabletop RPGs have either moved inside of the home or they've moved online with platforms like D&D Beyond or, Roll20 and Forge. So TCGs require you to go into spaces, and I wouldn't say all TCGs do this. For example, like Magic does it, but Magic also has a digital client, and there are a lot of people asking for digital clients for Riftbound as well. I quite like it. I had stopped going to stores for a while. I went in for pre-releases for Magic, and now I'm going to stores a lot more. I'm going at least once a week, if not more. I had a period in the fall where I was going, I think, like every day I was at a different store. And I'm not doing this full time, so this is like outside of my job hours and my research time and writing time. So it was something that drew me to stores, and I find that the Riftbound community is a lot younger. It has a lot less of the baggage that I grew up with in the Magic space, and this is wonderful, right? It's also one of the reasons why I hope that there will be more Riftbound product floating around, and that there's going to be a greater variety of decks, so that deck costs go down across the board. And that things have like, somewhat equivalent demand, and it becomes easier for people to go to things. And I think that this is like one of the things that Riftbound has gotten the best. Or like it's had the most success with getting, especially things like the skirmish. And I'm not a fan of the current prizes for the March and April skirmishes, but skirmishes being like twice a season per store and you needing to go to different stores also means that all these LGSs are sort of co-constructed. Now, I'm speaking really from a Canadian context because I'm not in the US right now. I assume that things are quite similar to the US. Some of the third spaces that are left over include things like movie theaters, clubs, restaurants. Like these are third spaces in a lot of ways, but all of these have like significant price tags attached to them. And I find that LGSs, especially where Nexus nights are, $5 or even free for a lot of the ones that I go to, are wonderful ways to just get people to socialize, to meet other people face to face, to develop social skills, to develop good sportsmanship, to like learn how to cope with loss in matches and frustration. These are all like wonderful things. I do think that there needs to be more prioritization of third spaces in like social policy, but that's more for my like day-to-day work where I do like cultural consultancy stuff. It being gated behind a product, a TCG, is complicated because it means that there's still like a product that you need to buy to go meet other people. I think that, for example, the fact that Riftbound had sample decks and a lot of stores at proxy nights is wonderful for alleviating this. And although I empathize with a lot of people wanting a digital client, especially if you're like geographically remote, I do think that having different kinds of events and cheaper events or events that are like modified precons reduce that barrier. And we really should protect the third spaces that we do have left because they're a boon against, solitude and a lot of other social issues that can derive from like isolation. Just think of how bad like the pandemic was for a lot of people and how alone they felt when they had to be home. At least Canada was like pretty intense on this, and Montreal had like curfews and stuff. So I think LGSs are like one of the best places to still like have community in. I do think that we can make those communities also more welcoming. There are still like a lot of barriers, and that's a whole other discussion. So yeah, my feelings about TCGs being the gateway to these spaces is complicated. I'm happy it exists. I'm happy they're doing this, but I think we could do better, and we should. Yeah. Okay, so Nerian1509 asks why TCGs have this super unique LGS culture with an LGS that sits somewhere between a store and a club. So this is an extension of the last question. I actually placed these back to back because I figured it would be useful to talk about these. Riftbound is my first TCG, and I'm kind of astonished of this concept. I never heard of this before in my life before. This is something magical to me. So I think if you are somebody who's never dealt with these, it really it can feel alien and almost strange to go to an LGS, which is a local game store, and see like the way that TCGs are firing off. And Riftbound is one of them, but like Fab is firing off, One Piece, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, Magic. Together they form like a lattice. There's a lot of these kinds of events at different stores at different price points. And I think historically you should think about stores and clubs in a much longer trajectory. So for example, if you look at Japan, game parlors for gentlemen have a very old history, going back as far back as the 1930s, as far as I'm aware. And in Europe, I'm from Romania originally, so in Eastern Europe, there's a lot to do with coffee houses that came over from the Ottoman occupation, and also backgammon. So there's a lot of like playing board games at cafes was one of the premier ways to be in a third space and socialize and to talk about politics, about daily life, to just meet other people who are not your immediate coworkers or your family. And if you think about the U.S. Or North America or even the U.K., I think the space really was taken up by clubs, especially exclusive like clubs for upper crust social elites and things like golf clubs. These are very expensive, much more than anything we're talking about today, places in terms of cost to access. What they provide you is community, right? And so I think LGSs do this a lot for people who are into card games. And I also think there's something that is privatized compared to the kinds of clubs that you get in school, right? So you have sports clubs, you have things like chess club, debate club, math club. Depending on where you are and what your school is specialized in and what the national context is, there are clubs and those are sort of run through taxes that are fed into the schools, and the schools are supposed to run those clubs well. And I was very lucky because my school had like a D&D club that was run by a history professor. And so to me, I think you know, why the LGS has this unique culture is because it effectively gets to produce what these gentlemen's clubs or like upper crust clubs did with games like backgammon and roulette and poker and you know, like not the places that were not casinos by default, but for other kinds of audiences, younger audiences, and especially with, you know, more fantasy based products. So they're a very modern affair, and I would classify them as kind of like a third space in the way that comic book stores are also third spaces, and often comic book stores had TCG places, or there are stores here in Montreal like Otherworld Games sits on top of Captain Quebec. They're like the same company, but they run different divisions. So it's always been a weird mix between a store and a club. And I understand that it can feel like super alien because you're going into this place to buy a product, and then you notice that in fact this is like the front facing part of what is kind of like a card game speakeasy. And you could also like append to this miniature place, like miniature games as well. So if you go to places, Montreal has like Abyss, for example, where you can also play Warhammer, which needs a lot more space. But I think there's demand for these, especially as the presence of third spaces has like decreased in like where you can go to hang out and meet other people. And we're also past the era of like super vibrant like MMORPG spaces, which were also part of this. So it makes sense to me that we're going back to in person. There's also a post-pandemic component of people want to be in physical spaces again. They want to meet other people. You can see this with like the resurgence in tourism, the resurgence in like going to concerts, and also despite rising costs, like a desire to preserve theatrical movie going. So there's demand, and I that would be like my sense of why LGSs have culture like this, and also why LGS culture is very different from one city to another. So yeah, I hope that answers it, but this is a big question. We could talk about it for a while. The next question is by Rip Sinner. And this one's more of a gameplay one. So how many games does it take to get good? And I cut a lot of, there was like a larger part of this discussion, or this question, but I think I want to get to the meat of the question. And I think this is like a moving target question, because my answer is going to be, you know, what does good mean to you? Does good mean that you are going 50-50 at locals? Does it mean that you're winning a skirmish? Does it mean that you are like qualifying for like top 64 at a regional or even more? I'm going to take this and interpret it as being somebody who top cuts at a reasonably sized skirmish. So you go to your like 32 to 64 man skirmish and you walk out into top 8. And this is going to require a lot of practice. Like a ballpark for me when I play a deck is I would like to get, if I'm playing a digital card game, I would say 200 matches in with that deck to sort of understand what the deck is doing. And if I'm playing something physical, it's a lot harder to get that kind of, you know, that kind of experience. But I would say, like, if I go to my locals and I'm playing like 4 rounds of 2 to 3 matches on average 2.5, that's like 10 matches a night. For like a month, that's like 40 matches. If I'm not swapping decks at all, I'm playing like 40 matches on one deck. So I would say, like, I personally think around 50 to 100, depending on how complicated a deck is, to become reasonably knowledgeable about that game. Being good altogether, I think, can take a lot longer. And this is going to depend on your, you know, like how long you've been playing TCGs. If you are somebody who is coming to the game for the first time, this is your first ever card game, it might take you a while. It might take you half a year to really become proficient and to feel like you have control over all your games. I know some people who are crazy good. I was watching the PPS, the Pittsburgh Pro Play Summit this weekend, and I think one of the finalists started playing a year ago. Not a year, a week ago. And so there are people who just are going at crazy paces. What I will say is the amount of games varies quite heavily by deck and in regards to your uh, personal experience with card games. It also depends on your environment. If you're playing in a relatively like lower skill environment, which is totally fine, you might feel like you're winning a lot or that you are hitting 50-50. But then if you go to a different place where you have a lot of skillful players, all of a sudden you feel like you're really bad at the game. And this really is going to be a question of like, when do you get to play against very good players and feel like you are competing adequately and that they're taking you seriously? That's like kind of when I feel like I've become good. And that's a moving target. And some metas I do better and some metas I don't do as well. So what I will do for you is I would actually recommend something that was recommended to me. I boulder a lot, so I go rock climbing. And I've heard a lot of people tell me, like, don't measure yourself against other people. Don't measure your progress against other people's progress unless you are doing this professionally. Go at your own pace. And that's what I would recommend as well in this case is just play the game. And especially like try to stick to one deck or one hero or one color pair if you can for a while. And you will see fairly rapid improvement until you start playing with very good players. And at that point, I would recommend, looking at resources like my Winning More episode from a couple weeks back, where I do talk about like tools to improve beyond just playing games a lot. So, like very shorthand, probably like 100 to 200 matches on one deck. But you will like carry over some of that experience from deck to deck. And the more that you play, the easier it's going to get to pick up new decks and to move fast. And maybe sometimes it just clicks, and you get a lot more out of one deck at a time. The next question that we have is, do you think that Jinx, from a design standpoint, will ever be able to do well? What is she missing, and what would you change about her to make her viable or not? And this is by ZX14. And this is, I think, the first one where I'm gonna like tap out for a second from just the slideshow and move over to Piltover, because I think the answer here for me. So if we take a look at Jinx, right? Loose cannon is the legend. I've talked about this in some of the past episodes. At the start of your beginning phase, draw one if you have one or fewer cards in hand. So if you're at 0 or 1, you actually draw 2 cards. And this reads like a more conditional, somewhat constrained Draven clause. Draven draws an infinite amount and, in fact, really puts pressure at all turns. But Jinx wants you to empty the hand. And I'm sort of biased because I remember Legends of Runeterra where discard aggro was incredibly good. And Jinx and Draven were good with discard aggro. So what I do is I look at discard. And this is the main problem I have with discard is Jinx's package is actually used to good effect with other heroes. Like a lot of the discard package, so if you look at like Undercover Agent, Flame Chompers, Raging Soul, these are not used. Invert, I think you might think of as a Jinx card, but it has a very specific utility to deck some opponents out in like the Miracle matchup. But if you look at Scrap Heap, Traveling Merchant, Zon, and Ezreal, all these cards are currently used a lot. And it indicates to me that the discard to card draw package is somewhat limited but solid. What it's lacking, I think, if it was lacking one thing, would be units that are very synergistic with Jinx as game enders. So Jinx is kind of an aggressive deck. You want to dump your whole hand on the board and then have the opportunity to draw more every turn. But the problem I have with this is that the deck wants you to tempo out a lot of value, but you're not rewarded in the short term, you're rewarded in the long term. So there's kind of like an inherent issue with Jinx's legend ability, and I know a lot of people love her. She actually has like a strong shell right now, but it's basically like Miracle jammed into Jinx, and that will be the case if they just nerf Draven. Miracle has gotten jammed into Jinx, into Annie, and I'm not really seeing that change. The other thing that you have is Super Mega Death Rocket, which I think is a good card and is unconditional base removal as well. So the issue is not that Jinx is really missing a lot of specific tools. I think it's more that Jinx is competing with better legends in her own color that have like more broad applicability. And so there's like a thing where whenever purple red will be good, I think it'll just be better to not play it with Jinx unless other legends are removed or reworked or banned or whatever, or there are new units that are Jinx champions or Jinx signature spells altogether. We just had some reveals for like Master Yi's new signature spell, and that changes the way that all Master Yi's work because all Master Yi's can use it. So to answer the question a bit more, like directly, do I think that Jinx will ever be able to do well? I think it's quite doable to design a card that makes Jinx like viable. The question is like how elegant is it to do so? Like how many lines of text do you need to put on a Jinx hero to make it like brute force the legend, or what kind of signature spell do you want to play? What else is she missing? I think the answer is a good reason to discard your hand, like better finishers for discard. But I think people are very scared of doing that because Ezreal and Traveling Merchant are already like plenty strong. And what would I change about her to make her viable would generally be, I think you have to, if you want only her to be good, you have to intervene within the champ unit or the signature spell zone. The signature spell zone in particular, I think, is only accessible to her. But the answer is like you want discard synergy. You want cards that make discarding easier and that reward you for discarding at this tempo. And I would really want it to be things that are not just drawing cards, which tends to favor value game plans over aggressive ones. So, yeah. Okay. Next question. I laughed when I saw this the first time. At Meth asks, how do I go about building decks for myself, especially those that haven't been built and optimized by a pro? So this is like a super interesting question because often I will start with a deck archetype that is already put together and kind of refine from there, especially if I'm like going to competitive events. But when I'm brewing, for the most part, I tend to go by vibes. So I tend to start off with a legend that I want to try. And legends are relatively streamlined to consider things like, your signature spell and your chosen champions. And a good example is I was actually playing a very weird yellow-orange Aurora deck with Fiora because I wanted to play Fiora, but I found that I wanted better reasons to use Riposte, and I thought that mid-range wasn't fair enough. So I started experimenting with slower shells or, incorporating pieces of other decks that work. I want to shout out Colin Kaiser from Challenger TCG because he was giving an interview, or at least talking about his tournament approach a couple months back. And a quote that he said stuck with me. And I also talked about, I think, a Reed Duke quote a couple of weeks back, which was, you need the right tools for the job. So like in set 1, everybody was annoyed that Kai'Sa was really strong and that you were really strong. And Kai'Sa was really strong because I think it's a straightforward deck to figure out. You jam in removal with power costs and you discount the power cost and you play very good on curve units like Ravenbloom Student and Lecturing Yordle and Kai'Sa Survivor, and then you jam in your Hextech Rays and your Void Seekers and all of this. This in turn makes a lot of units worse because if there's a high preponderance of that deck running around, you're like, okay, well, I can't play units that die to like 3 cost removal as much, or I have to make them pay for it. And so something like Aurora Yi popping up makes a lot of sense. It effectively plays to that deck's weaknesses to create like a binary 2-deck meta where one deck is removing small units and the other deck is playing very big, slow units. And so Set made a lot of sense in that matchup, in that meta, because Set is fast enough to set up board states that will repel Yi trying to break in, and it will resist a lot of the removal that's up from Kai'Sa. Now, Set got a lot worse when Purple got better, but I think if you want to have a good time, you need to sort of look at what's around your environment. I tend to go to a lot of stores that do net deck, So I can reasonably assume that I'm going to see a lot of Draven, a lot of Aurelia, a lot of Ezreal. And so I have to think, okay, well, all three of these decks are on purple. So my deck can't be weak to purple. Like, I can't play decks that just like collapse to like Rebuke or Faf, and that makes deck building more restrictive. But I think of decks now, because of a lot of the stuff I consume, as a series of problem solving. So I need my deck to have ward, I need it to have can't be targeted, or to produce a lot of tokens. I need it to be able to compete for points relatively fast. So, you're like building up a series of answers to all these questions. And if you look at, I think one of my earliest videos, I talked about buckets, which is a term that you see a lot in Magic Commander brewing, where people are going to say, well, the deck, your deck has a certain number of cards. You have like 39 cards outside of your champion. And so you can think of packages of 6 cards that fulfill certain functions, like units that are good early. So you want like your 2 drops and your 3 drops. You want like 6 to some, some would say 9 or 8 of those. Then you want some removal, 3 to 6. You want some card draw, 3 to 6. And you want things that are like synergizing with your core deck. And then you're going to end up with some flex slots. So when you hear, for example, people are saying like, oh, this deck is like really tight, it probably means that there's not a lot of flex slots after you've solved for the problems you're likely to encounter. Obviously, this is not like like universally applicable vector all the time. Different decks are built differently. Combo decks, for example, need a lot more space devoted to their core game pieces than like an aggressive deck that just plays like all the best cards across the curve until it like wins. So I go about decks by really examining what legends are in vogue where I'm playing, what legends feel like they could be good into those legends. How do I have to build those legends at a core level? Like, what are the core game pieces for each game plan? And then I try to answer some of the problems I have around me, and then I like fill out the rest of the deck. And I think there's some questions about teching and sideboards that I'm going to get to, but that's generally the way that I go about it. And often this leads to failure, and it actually makes me better at understanding why my thinking was flawed, or why certain pro players arrived at the conclusions they arrived at, which is often the correct conclusion, but I feel like I need to get there on my own. So yeah, I experiment a lot, I lose a lot, and I lose to much better players, and I ask them like, what did I do wrong, or what cards suck, and then I like start adjusting from there. So I hope that answers. Next question is by Shardley or Shardley 1288. What future legend are you most excited for, and what colors or gameplay do you expect them to have? So, I mean, I've been burned by trying to expect anything because I really love Azir, but I never would have expected Azir to be an equipment commander, so that's kind of out the door. I will say my favorite legend, bar none, is Pantheon. So I love Pantheon, and Pantheon had a sort of buff / targeting theme in LOR. I expect Pantheon to still favor mid-rangey, combat-focused colors, so I would not be surprised at all for Pantheon to be a Fury body or legend, which is kind of like the color combination I'm cursed to love, but never have success with as much. And I expect them to somehow relate to being mighty again. I think it's probably going to have something to do with being ready, or getting certain breakpoints when you're mighty. So, for example, like maybe your units get deflect, or they get shield or assault when they're mighty, or something like that. But I would not be surprised to see that be the case. I'm not sure that it will be anything like Rengar has like units that buff up when they arrive in play. Volibear ramps you when you play mighty units, and Lucian wants equipment. I think Pantheon's really going to be more about choosing your units or becoming mighty, would be like the two things that I want to see. And I suspect that his champ spell will be something like Grand Skyfall, which will like allow you to play a unit directly to a like a board space, probably at like action speed or something, which would be amazing. Like I would love some more of that, but I'm a degenerate who likes playing reaction speed units. So yeah, that would be my choice. Up next, So Aman Kumar asks, what is a trigger? And what is a chain or a stack? These concepts are talked about by elite players, but hard to grasp for new players. This question actually, I really wanted to get right, so I actually prepared a slide that was circulating on the Reddit a while back. So I think one of the easiest ones to start talking, I'm going to talk about what a trigger is, and I'm going to move on to the chain. So a trigger is an effect that prompts a response. And the way that Runeterra works, playing a gear or playing a unit does not start a chain. It doesn't trigger anything. But something like any Dark Child has a trigger. So at the end of your turn, ready 2 runes. Normally, the end of the turn actually doesn't have triggers, so it doesn't exist as part of a chain or anything. But any has this ability, and this is a triggered ability. So the way that I would describe a trigger is an ability that is conditioned upon a certain game state or a certain action taking place. In this case, the turn ending. So when somebody says like trigger goes on the stack, that's one. Any Stubborn has another one, right? When you play me, return a spell from your trash to your hand. This is a play trigger. So when Annie enters the battlefield, which in Magic is called an ETB, this ability goes on the chain. It triggers and it creates a chain. Now let's talk about the chain. So the chain or the stack is really the chain is the correct term for Riftbound, but a lot of players take this from Magic, where it's called the stack. So the Showdown, for example, creates a number of chains. And a good example of this is if you look at a single phase combat, you move to an occupied battlefield, and immediately there are 2 kinds of things that can trigger: when I attack triggers and when I defend. I've always had this explained to me like it's a stack of cards, but you can also think about it as a stack of pancakes. The last pancake that's added is the first one that you have to eat because it's on top. So if you go in and you only have 1 attack trigger, that'll be the only thing that triggers, and it's going to create a chain. And then you can play reactions. So you can play attacker, defender, order reactions, and they will activate in that order. So the order that you play them in is the order that they like stack up as a stack of pancakes. But then they will like resolve, so they'll like fulfill their conditions in the reverse order. So when I defend, triggers always resolve before when I attack triggers. If you look at the subsequent slide, you can also notice that you can start chains not with attack and defend effects, but with action cards. So action cards can start chains, as can reactions, but only if you are in a state where you have focus, and you can start these kinds of chains. You can also start a chain outside of a showdown. So for example, if you play a unit or Annie's effect goes on, if you play a unit that hasn't entered a play effect, or something like Annie's end of turn effect or Jinx Loose Cannon's start of turn effect, those all start chains. But because they're not showdowns, and they're not, so there's no when I attack, when I defend stuff, and actions can only be played during showdowns or during your turn to start a chain. So you would only have triggers and reaction spells. There's a lot of rulings on how to figure out what like reactions, triggers, and the chain, how they work. But really, this is like the primary order of things is sort of like triggers are things that start a chain, and they're triggered by something, which is indicated on the card or on another card that will trigger when you play a certain kind of card. And then you can proceed in the order indicated by this graphic, unless I'm wrong. But I'm pretty sure this is like up to date and correct, as far as I know. Okay, so the next question we have is by Jordi Lopez, 1709. So how do you develop a theory for a particular matchup? Is there a strategy that is not trial and error, or it's just knowledge that comes up with playing a lot of that matchup? I think a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. So earlier I mentioned that certain players have a lot of card game experience, and so I think it's quite easy to understand deck archetypes and how those archetypes are supposed to play based on what the text on them is. So for example, Kaisa reducing the cost for spells indicates to you that that deck will always run a lot of spells that have power costs. and that deck will suffer if you charge them additional power for those spells. So it made sense that things like set or ward units, or not ward, deflect units, made Kaisa like have much worse matchups, or just playing like ginormous units made her have worse matchups. So a part of developing game theory for particular matchups is understanding how each deck that you want to beat plays and how each deck is supposed to play kind of in a vacuum. And then it's trial and error. So you have to test like what feels good, because a lot of decks have different timings. And so a good example would be, you're like, okay, well, my opponent is playing a purple deck, and if I have a deflect unit, it's going to be like really costly for them to have to constantly target my deflect unit. So if I'm playing like Kiana is going to be really annoying for my opponent if they're playing like Fight or Flight or Rebuke. But then if you look at that deck, and that deck only runs like 3 Fight or Flight and 1 Rebuke, and everything else only targets their units, you're going to realize that they might be quite fine with paying that deflect cost, or might play the cards so late that the deflect cost doesn't do anything. So that really comes from partially understanding like deck speed, but also just trying a lot. And yeah, I think to refine decks to get them like really well tuned, and especially tuned for a meta, which is quite different from one place to the next and from one week to the next, it's just playing a lot of that matchup and understanding what the quirks of each deck are. So I think figuring out like game theory starts from a theoretical or like more formal analysis component, at least for me, and then it moves into trial and error. So I tend to build a deck. I tend to like go run it at some locals or online, or I just like goldfish it by myself to figure out how it works on its own. And then I run it into the field and I try to get an idea of what it struggles against. And certain decks are just like not favorable, and I try to like tune the deck to get better against those matchups. But yeah, I think that's how you go about this. Okay, so Leviticus 21 asks, I'm new to card games, and it was daunting to look at a game like Magic that has over 30 years of cards to try and jump in. What amount of cards is too much for a card game? And I'm shortening the comment because it was a longer comment. What is Riftbound's plans to address this, and what do you think is the best way to address, the quantity of cards? So listen, the amount of cards that are too much for a game varies from one person to the next. I jumped onto Riftbound because I find young or fresh card games or card game ecosystems to be much more enjoyable to solve for me than really established ones. I think Magic has upwards of 22k unique cards and 40k cards if you're counting reprints, which is an absurd amount. But most formats, you don't actually have to care about that many cards. And I think the answer to this, and what Riftbound plans to do and talked about since day one, is rotation. So when we hit 10 sets, the first 5 will rotate out, and so we'll always be fluctuating somewhere between 5 sets and 10 sets, which is something like 1,300 cards to like 2,200 cards. Most of those will not all be relevant at the same time. And I think rotation is quite frankly the best way to address this. There's no real way to like thin down the number of cards that you have to deal with other than to cut some of them out from contention. I also do think that bans are warranted when there are cards that need to be removed for the health of a game in terms of diversity or like average power level. So that also makes the game more manageable in certain cases. But yeah, I'm a fan of rotation, and I think a lot of people are scared about rotation because rotation means that your some of your cards will no longer be legal in the main format of the game. But there are other formats, and I'm actually what's called like you would refer to as a limited player in Magic. So I play a lot draft and sealed, kind of like pre-rift events where you only play what you open, and I find that also makes you better at the game because you are dealing with less cards and you have to understand how to value those cards within the ecosystem of a set. So for me, the amount of cards that's too much for a game is probably like somewhere above like 3,000. But realistically, what makes a game difficult for me to deal with is if there is random generation of cards mid-game, which happens more in like digital card games. It happened in LOR with Invoke, for example. I did not find that mechanism enjoyable. But otherwise, I think this is dealable through like rotation and targeted intervention and the production of different formats for the people who do want to play in those. Yeah, I think that's really it. Okay. So, Dojo Par says, some players in my local group keep repeating a statement that some legends will, quote, scale better than others as future set releases happen. Do you agree with this idea of certain legends getting more viable than others as the card pool increases in size? So, in theory, you could imagine that every legend will scale infinitely as more options are added to its roster, and that you will just get more out of it than you could have imagined. So, you could imagine like Yasuo gets better targets to push into battlefields, Kai'Sa gets better spells to discount, Master Yi gets better units to play to board. But I do think that there are some legends that will scale better. So a good example of this is like right now, Azir is kind of locked into one build because there's just not enough equipment to make his ability work properly. Or I talked about Jinx a while back. Jinx needs more kinds of discard cards and payoffs with different kinds of reward vectors to actually find new play styles. So I think there are legends that will have new lines of play that will open up. It's kind of hard to figure out if all of them will get equally better. And this is a much more complicated discussion about what's called parasitism. So like, are there archetypes that only work with their own archetype? So we, a discussion to have with this would be like, Rumble only cares about mechs, and so it's going to be harder to scale Rumble as much as it is going to be to scale Kai'Sa, because printing good cards for Rumble means printing mechs most of the time, whereas printing good cards for Kai'Sa just means printing cards with power costs that she can discount. So I do think that's the case. And I think certain cards will scale a bit differently. Now, there's a different vector for Legends of for Riftbound than there is for Magic or other card games, which is signature spells and champions. I think there's a lot of like older legends that can scale very unpredictably when there will be like new signatures or champs that will interact and produce kind of like hybrid kits. So a good example of this is like there's old Yi with Highlander and there's like new Yi with Alpha Strike. But if you get like old Yi and use Alpha Strike, or use Highlander and new Yi, you're going to get a lot of like multiplication of units and signature spells. That's a bit harder to predict. So, take this with a grain of salt. So, just a guy FF asks, or says, I'd like a deep dive on why holding is so bad right now and how to potentially remedy the issue. Okay, so this is a bit complicated to graph out very quickly. But what I would tell you is, if you take a look at the structure of the game, right? I mentioned that if you are coming from a different game where you think about life point totals, the game is really like a zero-sum total of 0 to 20 and life wins. But Riftbound's not like that. There are in fact like two ways to win. One is conquering, one is holding. Theoretically, you could say there's a third one, which is like scoring off of abilities. And if you take a look at something like Grove of the God Willow, I think is one of the better cards for this. Grove was one of the better battlefields for holding in set 1, used pretty liberally in hold decks. So when you hold here, draw 1, right? So here's the thing. If you want to score to 8, and you want to play a holding strategy, you still have to conquer. So conquering deck only needs to conquer 8 times to win, but a holding deck still needs to conquer twice. So hold decks can never just be hold decks, and mechanics that only work with hold automatically start at about like a 75% payoff ratio. So something like Grove of the God Willow is limited to like holding there. If you theoretically activated this battlefield more than the other one that you activated, you would probably still only get like 4 card draw out of this compared to something like Dreaming Tree, where you could get like draw a turn, and if you are there as a combatant, you can like use that pretty liberally. So that's like a really good battlefield. Reaver's Row we talked about. So there are mechanics that just scale better. Now, the other aspect of this is hold effects, right? So there is a thing to talk about here, which is there's just like I'm in like 2 different colors because I was working on a deck. There's not like that many hold effects. If you take a look, like Ari, I think is one of the better hold effects, but you're talking about like an overcosted, understated unit. If you take a look at like green Ornn that isn't even played in Ornn, if you hold, you get to draw a little bit more. So this requires you to like be able to conquer, commit equity, and then stay there for a turn. And your opponent gets to play spells, try to dislodge you with units. This is one of the reasons why accelerate units are so good, is because they break a lot of this. And then you look at like hold strategies in general. So a good one to think about is like Lee Sin Centered was really used nominally for hold strategies. So things like buff stacking across a wide board with like yellow set. But then if somebody like rebukes your one hold unit, it kind of crumbles your entire strategy. Whereas like people who are committing one Kaisa or like a Darius or something and are like going in and out, they're not like hard committing to points. So I think one of the main issues is holding exposes you to much more of your opponent's game agency because it requires you to give them a full turn, and it requires you to also play effects that are not going to be as strong when you're attacking as when you're defending, and you still have to attack at least 1/4 of the time. So like once per each battlefield. You could argue only, 1 out of 8 of your points if you are only conquering one battlefield and holding with something like a Tiana. And this causes a lot of issues with how hold strategies are working. I think to make holding better, the spells that get your units off the board have to become worse. And this is a subtweet rant about purple. You can't afford to play like a 7 mana accelerated Lee Sin and then drop like other units if somebody is playing like Rebuke for 2 and pops your hold for like 1/4 of the resources that you spent and then probably eats your units. And also right now, one of the reasons why holding is so bad is because of Draven. Well, this is actually, I needed the legend. But yeah, you can't leave units on a battlefield. If you lose combats to Draven and you give them card advantage, you are like 2-for-1ing yourself every time, and often you can like even produce board states where you will blow yourself out by accident or because your deck can only play that way. I think one of the better looks at this is the only deck that can reasonably hold right now is like Miracle Draven or Detonate Miracle, where you can just dump such a wide board that there is no board removal that will actually like break the hold. And it's not because Draven's better at holding, it's because Draven can just dump so much might on one point and no unit is contingent on another unit. So we need units with more shield, we need units that are better defensively, and we need units that don't require other defensive units to make them better. And we probably need offensive units or offensive strategies to sort of be depowered a little bit. In particular, purple, I think, is like making life really hard for orange. Orange being one of the better hold colors in the game, like orange green. You could argue like green blue with Ari as well. And also the other thing is there are a lot of pieces of removal that target battlefields, and currently like yellow is not one of the best colors. If yellow was better, I think holding would be less bad than conquering, because a lot of yellow's like removal is a bit more unconditional, but you're still going to have cards like Blast of Power or Drag Under or Void Seeker that only target battlefields and not base. And so the game is currently built in a way where I think holding is just not advantageous as much as I would love it to be. And we either need to get units that can produce points on hold in weird states, or units that are just better at holding. I think like one of the best units that I've seen in a while for like holding It's not in yet is the new Vile Mom. So if you look at like yeah, so this card I think is fantastic for holding, but not in every matchup. So you're gonna have to figure out like what matchups you want it in. But the fact that it has ambush means you make it a lot more difficult for your opponent to push into battlefields. It's not a spell, so it can't be counterspelled. And enemy units with less might deal less combat. Just don't deal combat damage. So this breaks cards like Imperial Decree, which have been like absolute bunker busters. Like no whole deck has worked because Imperial Decree plus tokens has existed. And then it has a whole draw card. So if you can like reasonably play this in something like Yi or like an Ari deck, then those decks are going to get a lot better. So we need tools like this, I think, to really make holding better. All right. Okay, so Burrito God 59 asks, what do you think it would take from a high level for an aggro deck to be tier 0? Is it possible with how much ramp and battlefield denial there is in the game? I think it is possible. I think we're actually like much closer to it than it seems possible for it to exist. And I think for it to be tier 0, so for it to be really broken, it would basically need to close the game in like on turn 5. I think if you can find an aggressive deck that closes the game before your opponent can ever get to like 10 resources without ramping, you just win. I think that ambush units are going to contribute a significant amount to this. And I think if there is one unit that will contribute to this that I am excited for / scared about, it is Rengar Trophy Hunter. And I'll explain to you why. So Rengar Trophy Hunter is a 5 might, 1 power, 5 cost, 1 power, 6 might unit, and it has ambush. And ambush is very important for how aggressive decks are going to be working, I think, going forward, where you can play units at reaction speed. And this has really been one of the things that's held back aggressive decks, has been that you can't really leave up resources. With Rengar, you can. And he has the clause, I can be played to a battlefield where there are enemy units, even if you don't have enemy units there. So he gets like ambush, but on enemy fields. And this means you can effectively play Rengar as your opponent's trying to conquer a battlefield, kill their unit, get a point on their turn, and then hold it for 1. And the reason why I think Rengar is going to be useful for these strategies, and I'm not saying aggro is going to be good now, but I think this is kind of what is needed for aggressive decks to be good. It's the capacity to shorten the game clock. So I'll give you an example. If you are playing with 2 battlefields normally, so if you're playing with, I don't know, like Vile Maw, right? So you're playing with Vile Maw, you both play Vile Maw, and you jam your units there. On turn 1, you play your units. On turn 2, you put them there, you conquer. Turn 3, you hold. Turn 4, you hold. Turn 5, you hold. You've won the game. That's 8 points on your start of turn 5. So that is the mathematical fastest amount of points that you can score in the game. Yes, there are cards like Tryndamere, and there are cards like Draven Audacious, which can shorten the game clock, but those I think don't work as well in fast decks as they do in controlling decks that want to catch up. Ari can do this as well, but that's really for holding. But yes, Ari also I think is kind of an aggressive unit, despite the fact that it wants to hold. Now, what happens when you are playing like an Arena's Greatest, and your opponent plays an Arena's Greatest, and all of a sudden you have an ambush unit like Rengar? This means that you would start Arena's Greatest. So you would each start with 1 point, so you'd start at 2. On turn 1, you don't play anything. On turn 2, you play a unit that you can accelerate into a battlefield. You play 2 units that can accelerate in battlefield somehow, or on whatever you pushed turn 1. This was like Yasuo's thing in game in last set was you played a 2-drop, then you played another 2-drop, and you pushed both of them into battlefields, and you started scoring super fast. Well, you would score at the start of turn 4. So reasonably, what happens when you're playing Rengar, Orange Rengar, is that you can sometimes turn your opponent slowing you down into speed up occasions. And so anything that I think makes you win on that 5th turn anyhow is really what is essential for an aggressive deck to like close the game as fast as possible. So you need your deck to synergize well with Ambush. You need your deck to synergize well with Orange Rengar. You need it to synergize with Arena's Greatest. I think these are like the clauses for a deck currently to be as good as it can possibly be. And the like catch-all question is going to be any card that like scores extra points shortens the game clock, especially if it's a card that is playable at like 5 to 6 resources that can like shorten the game by a turn. It can get like pretty nasty pretty quickly. I know this is not really what we're talking about, but I also feel like Aurora is secretly kind of a deck that can do this because of Baron. So, yeah, Baron Nashor I think is an interesting card. It's not technically an aggressive card. Oh, I don't want to. I just want to look at it. Okay, well, I can't look at it because it's the deck I was building is not the same way. There we go. So Baron is a card that you can play when you're playing Aurora, and it will create a third battlefield that it will go score immediately. And this often means that, for example, if you are like jammed somewhere, you can actually produce a 7th point. So you can like hold 5-6 on your 2 battlefields, then you play Baron or you ramp it out with Aurora at the end of the game, end of the turn, and you can then score to 7, and if you hold any of the 3 battlefields, you win, which is like a hell situation for your opponent because most decks are not built to deal with 3 battlefields. So some of this happens. I also think Lucian and Spear Triforce combo is like part of this. So Triforce, Trinity Force is also technically a card that I would say is kind of an aggressive tool, right? It shortens the game and it produces might so you can break into battlefields. Yeah, holding is bad now, but this plus Spear on Camel is one of the reasons why Lucian works. So again, a little bit less purple in the meta, and I think a little bit more point compression, and you're likely to see a lot of people being angry about like a tier 0 deck. Why do I think the Yasuo legend is struggling to find competitive success? So I played a ton of Yasuo set 1. I played Galewind's list and also Ice Cream's lists. So like the super fast dump all your 2 drops onto the battlefield Yasuo and the control Yasuo. And I think the answer is 2 energies a lot for his ability. Yes, it's like pseudo accelerate, but he lacked units that you really wanted to push into battlefields. And he suffers, much like Jinx, from the distinct honor of just being the worst of the 2 legends. So if you look at, that's not Trinity, right? Like you look at Yasuo and you realize like his ability only works on your turn during a neutral state, and it's pretty inflexible, and you can push a unit from base to battlefield or from battlefield to base, but not really anywhere else. And then you look at Aurelia and you realize, okay, well, basically this turns any spell that I play into burn 1 extra to get either ganking or retreat or accelerate. And when you conquer, you can also repeat it. So a good example of this is, like what does Yasuo do that Aurelia can't? So Yasuo can top deck units like, a really good example of this would be like one of the Bunker Buster plays was White Flame. So in set 1, you could play White Flame and you could push it into a battlefield and you could give it its own +8. So you'd have like a 16 might like breaker. And that was like the main thing that Yasuo could do. You could also push your own Yasuo into a battlefield, and the threat of activation was always like real because it would like deal 6 damage and then with its effect and then like another 6. That's kind of it though. Whereas with Aurelia, what you can do is you can play White Flame, and then you can play like Defiant Dance or Boots or GA or On Guard or any of these and burn 1 rune to effectively get the same effect as Yasuo, but also whatever else you're getting, and then you can reactivate it. You can like pay one more. So I think Aurelia just is a better Yasuo, unfortunately. And I think Yasuo, his only like thing that he gets to do that Aurelia doesn't, and this may become relevant at some point, is you get to champ zone purple Yasuo. If there's ever like a combo deck that revolves around just like nonstop moving purple Yasuo around for points, that could be his home. And my sense is that Yasuo will remain a more aggressive option. He can also be salvaged by like a new signature spell or a new champ spell, depending on what releases. But yeah, I think this is really what's holding Yasuo up, unfortunately. Still quite decent in the color pair if you're like hunting for a metal card or something, but I wouldn't play him currently. Okay, I'm gonna take a drink so I have the energy for this. So, Kali Roshi 7853 asks, are bans really necessary? Though I imagine Riot wants to do this, what are the pros and cons of just raising other colors to an equivalent power level as purple? I'm going to go find an X post that I was looking at really quickly that I think I recently reactivated my X after not being on this for a while. So yeah. I feel like...
Okay, so Eric Liu gonna go ahead and draw 2 cards.
If you just look at what's going to happen on this board with Eric Liu, just look at the speed of what's going to happen, right? So plays Noxus Hopeful, plays Ezreal, discard draws, into stack deck, into Called Shot. I'm trying to remember what the exact play was for this. Yeah. Plays Called Shot. Rasa? No, other Called Shot. And this is on Jinx, by the way, which I think is really hilarious because we were just having the discussion about, like, is Jinx viable? More Called Shot. Sees Nocturne, drops another Nocturne for 1 rune. I think it's another Called Shot. Yeah. A ton of this has been done with like zero runes expended, right? So yeah, and now it's gonna be like Rasa or something like that, like some absurd. So it's battering ram, and then taps 2 for another Noxus.
And then why not?
There is no deck in the game that can deal with this. Like, there is nothing that can approach this kind of amount of might on the board. Yes, there are answers. Also, this is hilarious because it's an Aurelia and Yasuo. And I want to... John Rossum... I think the Challenger folks have this picture. There's like an amazing picture that was going around from the weekend event that I think is another like good encapsulation of this. I just need to like find it. So bear with me for one moment. Yeah, it's this picture. This, which is like the 59 might battlefield. So the answer is this healthy for the game? And by healthy, is this what we want the game to be? My answer is like no. I think this invalidates basically every fair strategy in the game to an extent that is like absolutely impossible to match. Destroying this board generally means that they get to recycle it, especially the detonate version now I think is like prone to not even being removed. Yes, there are cards like Unchecked Power, but Unchecked Power is you're not drawing your whole deck, and they are, and only a very small few amount of decks can actually play it right now. And then you're still like open to things like Hard Bargain, and they can destroy your cards. So this question is, are bans really necessary? And I would contend, yes, they are. If I go and I look at the Magic the Gathering banned cards, and I go to the oldest most broken ass format of all time. The first card that is banned in vintage, or it's restricted to one because they don't do bans for the most part, is Ancestral Recall. And if I look and I show you what Ancestral Recall is, hey, Ancestral Recall is 1 mana, draw 3. This card is often described as the most broken card in all of Magic, but not only is Ancestral Recall restricted, so is Brainstorm. And Brainstorm, if Scryfall doesn't crap out, is draw 3, put 2 back on top of your deck in any order, so it's kind of like Stack Deck. So not only is something that resembles Raw Draw restricted, but also this is restricted. What else is restricted? Dig Through Time. Dig Through Time, look at the top 7, put 2 of them into your hand, rest on the bottom of your library for a ton of mana, which you can discount. I suspect you're starting to see a bit of a pattern here. And I don't want to like harp on this too much. I think if you look at modern ban cards, it's a bit different because like the formats are different. But Vintage is the highest powered format of Magic with 30 years of card accumulation. It's not normal that we have cards like Called Shot that are in the game right now that are this strong. And I think the problem is you can't raise the power level. The power level of this is already looking at a Detonate Miracle Draven mirror match and kind of going crazy. And even players who have been on the deck like John Rossum are like, please like fix this. I don't want to play this kind of game anymore. So I think the pro is that it makes your game intelligible again, and it makes it fun for players to play. This is another thing too. We can talk about turn timers. Like right now, Miracle games are all going to time, which is causing functional issues inside of large scale tournaments. But I also played through a really long stint of Miracle games over the weekend at a skirmish, and I also have seen a lot of people play into Miracle players that are struggling to find all their lines. Now the con, and I do think that there is one con that is real, is banning cards in decks will make, even if they're not targeting rare cards, so even if they ban cards like Called Shot, I think it will become an issue to deal with, like the card price. Ezreal is going to go down. Seal of Discord is going to go down in price. Like there's no way about it. I'm pretty sure Ezreal is already going down. If I look at TCG player, obviously there was some hype, but you know, if I look at like Ezreal Prodigy, Jesus. Yeah. So if you look at Ezreal Prodigy, it's already like falling down a crater, basically in terms of value. And I don't expect that to like change. Part of this is I think expectation that bans will occur, but if you look at like the announcement, this card was going down way before the Dave Guskin post. If you look at like Seal of Discord, is it the same? Seal of Discord crashed, I think started going down a bit more recently and then went back up and is still like down. So correlation is not causation, obviously. I think intervening in the game will almost certainly introduce price fluctuation. However, I would argue that the people losing money on these cards will always be less than the amount of people who are no longer playing your game if you let these cards run rampant. If the game dies because there's no intervention, it's going to be bad. And I say this as somebody who's played in metas that I hated. I hated Simic, like the Simic time around Hydroid Krasis being released in Magic, for the people who remember, where like blue-green was just so strong that blue-green was like the one deck they wanted to play, and they ended up getting Oko banned, but it took a while. Hogak the same. Nadu was like pre-banned. They intervene very liminally, and I use Magic because it's the game I have the most knowledge about. Yu-Gi-Oh! Has a pretty liberal ban list from what I understand as well. But that game has also degenerated to the extent where like games end on turn 1 when you display infinites. I don't want Riftbound to be that. I want Riftbound to be an actual game where you play your turns and there's like progression turn to turn. And at this point, I don't think you can do that without an intervention with bans. Obviously, they held off on doing bans because the Shenzhen Open is this weekend. and they don't want players who've been practicing decks and who have like put their resources into this before the Chinese Open to like get punished. But this stuff is getting hammered from orbit like at ASAP. We are not making it to Lille. I can't imagine that we're making it to Lille without intervention. Not even because the meta is toxic at the highest level. This is harming like brick and mortar players. And I'm gonna say this once and only once. Games that have toxic metas at the top lose casual players first, and it atrophies the capacity of the game to develop new product because people are not buying the cards. I played the revived Legends of Five Rings, and Crab was by far like the strongest domain for a while, and it just kind of like killed the game. And you really don't want that. So our ban's necessary. Yeah. And I think there are cons. Some people are gonna lose money on these cards, the same as they would if the meta shifted in any other way. And I think if you are, like, my advice to you would be like, don't buy seals, don't buy Ezreals right now. And if they are not like affected by the bans, then so be it. But if they are, you're gonna be happy that you didn't lose the money on that. And I just went in on Auroras. If Auroras gets banned, I'm gonna be sad, but I'm gonna understand that it's to allow other archetypes of decks to flourish. And I have a lot of other cheap decks that will like get value on the basis of those cards being banned. To move on to this, TDeep12 asked, what are your opinions on the upcoming potential bans? Cards worthy or not worthy of bans? All right, so this is the other part of the the discussion. I'm going to do a short version today because I think I actually do want to talk about this next week when they happen. But I'm just going to like remove all filters and we can talk about them. So, call shot. This card can't exist. This was a mistake. It's a design mistake, and I think it's fine to admit that it is a design mistake. And to the people who are saying like, if they admit that's a design mistake, it reduces confidence in the game devs. I think looking at this card and not admitting that this card should be removed infinitely decreases my like trust in their capacity to figure out what cards are broken and what cards are not broken if they don't address this. If the power cost had to be paid because we didn't have Seals or Ezreal, this card might be one of the best cards in the game still. With the reality that this card will often cost 0, this card is broken. It digs 4 and you see your deck. I did the math. If your deck is 39 cards and you play 3 stack deck, which allows you to see 9, 3 called shot, which allows you to see 12, 3 Ezreal, which allows you to see 6, and 3 detonate Shrove combos, which allows you to see another 9. That's 9, 9, 8, 12, or 9, 9, 6, 12. That's 18 plus 12 plus 6 is 36 cards, plus your opening 5-card hand. You have seen your deck. You can deterministically go through your entire deck, and I can tell you that is not good. No other combination of cards in one color can do this. Arguably, like, detonate puts you in red as well, but we can talk about this. I think called shot just needs to go, period. That's like number 1. Sorry, I'm getting very heated up by this. Reavers was another card that's been discussed a ton, and I just was having some discussions on the Montreal Discord with somebody about this. Reavers is a battlefield that effectively only benefits Conquer decks, which already I find that hold strategies need some love. So even if we were like not in the Draven meta and we were still in Kai'Sa, Reavers Row had some pretty unhealthy effects on the game meta when people like pushed in red Kai'Sa, Conquer, drew a card, and then saved it and then pushed somewhere else. Or like Darius as well. But the fact that this is interacting with Draven is like kind of, I think, the straw that broke the camel's back. The fact that you get to retreat from this at any time with cards like Traveling Merchant or Treasure Seeker to get treasure or a card, but your opponent can never back up out of it because they're going to give you a card is like awful. Like, you can't get out of these in any way. So I think these two are prime. Like if nothing else goes, these two cards need to go. And there will still be like issues with Draven, but I think Called Shot kind of will break Miracle, and I think that's necessary for the game right now. If there are infinite combos or insta-win decks, I think they need to display the combo much quicker. If you're from Magic and you've seen commander decks, this is kind of like the issue with like manual storm decks where people need to manually assemble the combo and execute it to win, which means that if you don't assemble it properly, you can lose. But it adds so much time and unpleasantness to the games. Acererak decks also do this, where you have to like display like 1,000 game actions to win. It's not fun. It's not fun to be on the receiving end of, and it will like there is an aspect of this which is not just like how strong are these decks, but like what do they do to the average player's experience, and that already like they are clearly the best tournament deck around right now, and if you look at the team Detonate Metafy, like they say as much, but also they're unpleasant to boot. And then I'm mixed between fight, Foff or Rebuke. Rebuke removes any unit, which is already a problem, but at least it costs 2 power, and it's a card that only has one modality, which is invalidating a large body. You could theoretically say, like, hexproof bodies or tokens will get around it. Foff, I don't think, has those restrictions. I think this card is another one of the sleeper cards. It was already strong as hell in set 1, but now it's hit a critical mass where the stuff that you can do with it is just way too strong with the addition of Treasure Seeker, and also Draven, obviously. But even outside of that, I think this card creates a critical mass of like savior unit effects that can be really toxic. But you can play it for 0, and Hidden is kind of obnoxious with this card because you will often be able to burn the runes and your opponent can't do anything about it. And you can move a unit from battlefield to base. So you can move your opponent's unit, you can move your own unit, and you can also move a unit that is ready to effectively turn this into pseudo ganking on your turn. I played a matchup where my opponent was on 3 Fight or Flight. There's nothing you can do. It effectively means that you are like at a 3+ unit differential, depending on what they do. It's strong. These I think would be like Called Shot and Reavers are like they need to go now. Fight or Flight, I would be very happy if it got removed. I'm expecting them to touch it a little bit less. Rebuke is in that same convo. And aside from that, I'm pretty light. I think those I would for sure tell you they need to go now. I know some folks have said Aurora. I think Aurora is annoying and it produces some weird bottlenecks design-wise where like every card that's ever printed will have to be measured against being played by Aurora. I mean, I'm like, you know, I'm thinking about Yi, guys. If there's a way to play like XP Aurora Yi, having my 13 might readied hexproof unit is pretty nasty. Like, I'm not saying this works, but like you have to think about that potential whenever you see a card like this. Baron is measured against Aurora, Vilema is measured against Aurora. Like all these cards are like pretty intense. And I'm not sure if Aurora needs to go. I've seen some people saying it should be restricted. I hate restrictions in card games. They should never be printed. Restrictions, basically what they do is they tell you can only play 1 or 2 of a card in a deck. It makes the deck more inconsistent, but when you lose to it, it still feels equally bad. So just like, no. For me, that's not at all what I think should be happening with these. At least that's my feeling. Bryn here, I've seen some people saying is also obnoxious. I'm used to cards like Grand Abolisher and Magic, which do this permanently during your turn. I think Bryn here really feels bad, but it needs to exist to clobber some of the Spellslinger decks into stopping. And I also think evidenced by the new Lilia card, Lilting Lullaby. I don't think this kind of effect is going to go back because they're printing it on other cards. So I don't think Bryn here is leaving. And I think it is necessary to keep certain of the spell slamming decks in check. So that would be my vibe with this. I also feel like Bryn here is a bit controlled now because it's not it's spell. Oh no, this is cards. So this is any card. So you can't like fight it with ambush. Yeah, okay. I'm like I wouldn't want to see it go now, but I can see the argument for it. And the other card that a lot of people are talking about is Stellacorn. I think Stellacorn is particularly an issue in Irelia. And it's an issue because you can move it around with cards like Foff and Ride the Wind, and also your natural movement, and Irelia's like ready ability. So this card is truly brutal. I played Jax, and moving this thing around like 2 or 3 times just kind of wins you the game. Because the more cards you draw, the better you can protect it, which leads you to draw more cards. I don't know if I would hit it now, but I can guarantee you that this card will feel like one of the strongest cards in green, probably for as long as it is in rotation. So these, I think, are really like the home of this discussion. And if you want to take a look, there's also the discussion around like cards and popularity of play ratios. Like there's a non-zero reason why I'm talking about these cards. Rebuke, Foff. I think Call Shot is weirdly enough. Yeah, like is it part of the Spirit Force stats? I'm actually surprised. Stats might not be up to date on this. Yeah, this looks wrong to me. Call Shot being lower play rate than Bellows seems like a weird metric. But the rest, it's last 30 days, so maybe it won't have like caught on to the upsurge in Miracle decks. Obelisk, I think, is fine, but there might be a discussion at some point that like it's too unconditional ramp. It's symmetrical, which is what makes me feel okay about it. Ferris is more like I'm annoyed, but they've already started revealing banish effects, so if we have ways to deal with it, I'm happy to wait for those. Like it's not ruining my life. Yeah, this is egregious for sure. Okay, done with the bans for now. How do you know how to tech your deck? This is a question by rdubs2. I know from your videos that there's control, aggro, and combo, and all the archetypes in between. And I know in the video that they were commenting on, I was talking about changing your speed, your playstyle. But for teching, I don't know how to categorize card packages that can deal with the types that I lose to. So teching is strange, or thinking about teching, because your deck has to be built to take into account the dominant strategies in the metagame at any time. So, for example, like decks aren't teched to Draven, they're just built with the idea that Draven exists around. If you tech your deck, it's more that you're targeting a specific deck. So, for example, cards like Adaptatron starting to be part of the sideboard is one way of teching for Irelia, because you can like push in an Adaptatron, maybe ride it around, and then you're gonna like kill their boots and their Zonias and whatever else. So teching. Earlier on today, I was talking about if you think about your card packages as things that answer creatures, that draw you cards, that produce viable lines for your primary strategy, then you want to think about your tech cards in your flex slots. So a lot of these discussions are like, do I run Thermo main or Thermo inside? And I think this effectively leads to like 3 categorizations. One is I main deck it, and the proportions that you main deck it in are varying on the curve of your deck and whatever is in your field. So for example, Not So Fast is just like a main deckable card because there are so many strong effects that target your units that you would want to use it. But you don't necessarily have things that are for targeting your own units. So Not So Fast is very usable. And in set 1, we couldn't really use Dreaming Tree as a battlefield in a lot of matchups because too many decks were getting value out of it. Well, in this meta, only Irelia really gets a ton of value out of Dreaming Tree. So you can use Dreaming Tree if you're in Irelia, or if you're a deck that is reasonably comfortable facing Irelia, and you can target your own units. So Jax uses it, Irelia uses it, or for example, Forge of the Fluffed in Lucian, because like nobody really gets to use Forge of the Fluffed all that much. So you can tech your stuff into matchups or like around them because they're not getting value. But when people are saying teching, it's really about like targeting specific matchups. And I think you can only do that in two cases. One is if you know the kind of event you're going to in the meta share, which I think right now at RQs is very difficult to do because of best of cards. The field is very wide open. But if you're going to a cash tournament, you're going to run into Draven. So teching things that smash mid-range Draven and Miracle is pretty good. There is I think like a pretty hardcore example, which is like if you're playing Master Yi Aurora and you tech it into Volibear Aurora, Stormbringer is a card that can really hurt Miracle. So there are cases where you can just try to tech your deck by like swapping it entirely to a different archetype. So think about it this way. Either in the flex cards, which is a couple slots, or your main deck, you want to target the dominant decks, and then you want to try to like lean them towards decks that you see often in your environment or that you expect seeing at tournaments. And then your overall choice of deck is a form of teching also. Yeah. Another example of this is like why do people run like less Defy now? Well, it's because Rebuke is like, or they stopped running it for a while because Rebuke was so like untargetable by Defy. But all of a sudden people realized that Defy is also good for hitting called shots. So like decks were oscillating between like 2 or 3 copies of Defy, figuring it out. I think 3 is the standard again. So we're all like figuring this out as a community. I hope this answers a little bit, but it's a tough discussion, and I think I'm gonna have to do an episode about teching in general. Probably not alone. I want to have somebody on to help with that. How should we approach sideboarding? As somebody who's new to sideboarding as a concept, sometimes it feels daunting deciding what to main and what to side. So this is an extension. This is a question by RoboBlock93. I think this question it follows from the discussion of teching. And my answer is these are cards that are hard shutoff valves for decks that you're likely to see but are not the dominant player. So like you don't sideboard Draven cards. You main deck Draven card or anti-Draven cards. But a good example is like Thermo. Thermo is a card that can cook Irelia and Azir and Jax. And you're likely to see enough Irelia to want it in your sideboard, but not so much that you would want it main board. And as some decks get more prevalent, so if you're in more Azir or in more like Jax, what's going to happen is instead of having one or 2 copies, maybe your sideboard gets to run a lot more of them. And then if you're only running into these decks, then they swap to being like main deck cards, maybe. So the process of sideboarding would be cards that target specific matchups, but that are not the matchups that you're most likely to see, where you're reasonably okay like taking a game 1 like loss, and then you can side in quite heavily. I'll give you an example. If I look at something like, I don't want to lose the deck I was working on. If I just go look at a deck library, right? So if you look at Very Best Gamers Jax list, so you look at the sideboard and you're going to notice a fairly wide sideboard that is running things like another Not So Fast for decks that target your cards like quite strongly, third Defy for like Miracle decks, Punch for non-purple decks, Zonia's for damage-based removal, Cannon Barrage was for Miracle, I think. Will is for Thermo, and Adaptatrons is for Aurelia. So there's like 2 Adaptatrons, which means that this is like really important for that matchup. But all these others are very toolboxy. And you can like take a look at a bunch of these. If you look at like Sam Sherman's Draven list, right? And you look at the sideboard, the deck can play more Bryn Hears for Aurelia, 1 Thermo. You can play like a version that's running you can swap into slowing down with Mindsplitters, where it's for like the mirror. So your sideboard is really like a series of answers to perceived threats that you haven't run into yet. And you should think of it that way. And sometimes it can also be to just shore up your deck when you're not running full sets. So for example, like 3rd Falling Star is in the side. This is because you probably don't want a triple drive, but there's some matchups where you'd be happy to. again. Again, the sideboarding and teching, I think, needs a more cohesive discussion, but it's hard to talk about without like devoting an entire episode. But my answer, if you want to understand it as a concept, is think of your sideboard as like your answers for expected, like the second most expected deck and the third most expected deck that you think you're going to run into. How can I get better at using cards like Mindsplitter and Sabotage? I'm having a lot of difficulty thinking through my opponent's possible lines and what card hurts me the most. I've lost multiple games at this point to what was probably discarding the wrong card because I was afraid of another card. This is a lot about spot counting. This is a question by The Unfortunate Pumpkin. So you have to understand what are the cards in your opponent's deck that your deck cannot answer. So it's not about cards that are like problematic now. It's cards that like will likely lose you the game down the road. So a good example is like Sabotage does different things. If I'm playing Lucian, I want to sabotage cards like Decree or maybe Call, but really Decree, because Decree is like the one card that deck cannot answer. If I'm playing Draven and I'm playing Mindsplitter, I want to Mindsplitter the card that will let my opponent get back into the game. So that will be the thing that loses me the matchup. When I was playing Control Yasuo, the best Mindsplitter target was Mindsplitter. I wanted to find their Mindsplitter so that I could empty out their hand and prevent them from getting back on board. This doesn't mean you're going to win every time, but it's not about the immediate threat. It's about what is the card that dismantles your game strategy overall. So this is kind of like inverse teching or sideboarding, which is trying to figure out what is the thing that is most harmful to you, not what you can do to harm your opponent the most. And then we have the B Marshy. How do you think the economics of a game impact the meta cycle of a game? Do cheap or relatively so cards decks take longer to figure out due to the subconscious value assigned to the expensive versions? I actually think it's the opposite. Often aggressive decks, which are built on cheap cards, will tend to be the ones that are figured out the most quickly. If you take a look at decks like Victor or Azir, those decks, actually Azir, I would say like Rocky Ho has sort of pioneered a version that is the top version of Azir consistently, because that deck was like very easy to acquire and to sort of test a lot with and to figure out. So I think people are drawn to cheap decks early on if they're not competitive players or if they're not like, you don't have infinite money. And so those decks collectively circulate a lot faster and are solved a lot faster. I think the most difficult decks and the ones that keep the meta alive are usually the controlling decks that are very niche. So if you take a look at like Alan ZQ's Ezreal, that is not a deck that is easy to pilot, and it's certainly not a deck that's easy to tune into the field that was out when he was tuning it. And so those take a lot longer to work on, and you do so privately. Now, this is my general sense. So I think the economics of the game absolutely impact the cycle. You tend to figure out aggro decks before you tend to figure out anything else. This has been the case for a long time. Even in digital card games like Legends of Runeterra, the fact that certain cards are commons and uncommons means that you get to play a lot more with them, and you get to like tune the ratios a lot more than if your deck is requiring like an infinite amount of epics and like signature spells. So I would argue it's the opposite. And then people are trying to find like out of the box answers to the dominant problems. And you also get like decks that get more expensive. So a good example was like, I didn't really see a lot of Miracle for a while because people just needed to get a hold of the cards. As opposed to, I just saw a ton of Azir, of Fiora, of Victor, because those decks were super, like easy to access. And I would argue that a lot of those decks, provided a basis to measure the success of decks like Aurelia and like Draven and Miracle decks against. I also think like this is somewhat mitigated by the fact that the Chinese meta forms before ours, and we get a lot of like data to work with. But one day when we are synced, I think card price will actually matter more to the cycle of the game. So this is another thing. If you're super interested in this, there's a field called political economy, which is really like the especially political economy of media or games, where you can read a lot more about this. But that's like a much longer discussion, and I do think that the cultural, I wouldn't say subconscious, I would say like cultural value assigned to expensive cards starts mattering, but that's slightly different than what we're talking about in terms of the meta cycle of the game. Yeah. And then, final question. Oh, not gonna answer that one. So that's it for the mailbag, and I hope this has been somewhat informative. Like I'm rapid firing through a lot of these, and these are off the cuff answers for the most part. So hopefully I gave you answers that are satisfying. Feel free to rebut if you are people who are asking these questions. I will do another one of these. I don't know if I'm gonna do it at 3K, but there's gonna be one coming in a couple months for sure. The plans for the rest of the week. Thursday is going to be the Jax in Focus episode. I'm having a ton of fun with Jax. I also think Jax is like well positioned if purple gets hit, so I'm happy to talk about it some more. And then next week, I will see, but the plan is to talk about the Shenzhen Open and the bans, which are likely to be announced right after the tournament, if they are. And I'm gonna wait, I think, to release that episode for that. And then there's a special episode incoming that I can't quite reveal yet, but I'm super excited about. And you can take some guesses if you want to figure out what that might be. But I think it's going to be a treat for everybody, so I'm excited to share it with everybody. Yeah, that's it. Enjoy or don't enjoy what is apparently the last week of Detonate Draven and the pain of sitting through Miracle. If you are a Miracle Detonate player, Godspeed to you. Have fun for whatever time is left for that deck. And I will talk to you again about Jax in a couple of days. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for all the subs and your questions. And I hope this has been useful.